So let's go ahead and get started with the first question. It's thanks to Little House Books, Laura Ingalls Wilder's childhood is one of the most legendary in our literature. Discuss how the factual account of Laura Ingalls Wilder's real life in Prairie Fires different from the fiction. How does an understanding of Wilder's life affect our perception of her work? So really, how did you find that it differed?
Well, I have to admit I haven't read the whole book. I'm working on it, but I have that initial part, you know, when she was growing up and everything, which I really, it's different than the books because the books are more
upbeat.
Yeah, they don't talk of, obviously she was a child, you know, remembering a childhood, so she had a different view. She didn't know about all the politics and all the things that were happening in the world and all of those things that we read about in the book. I like that part, getting all that context around it.
I sure did too. Yeah, I grew up in Marshall, Minnesota, and I've never been to her place, but of course we read the books. It was very interesting to know it in the context of history.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the movie they show some of the hardships, but the underlying was they always were a family and together, which I think is true in real life, possibly by the sound of the book. I've only read about half the book myself, but it was always, you know, upbeat on Little House on the Prairie. You know, everybody just, it wasn't the same. The threat of the Indians that they had, we didn't see that really, and all of those type of things, and the starvation and the plastic moving. I knew they moved a lot, but I didn't realize they had moved as much. And even Mary looks like she was never married, and yet in the book, in the Little House on the Prairie, they have her married, and so that was a little different too.
Yeah, I remember my mother. Oh, excuse me, Joanne.
No, go ahead. I just was going to say I hadn't read the books. I had seen, of course, the TV show, and the life was much, much more difficult than what they showed. That's what surprised me. I mean, I had no idea how difficult it was to try to work this land. I'm not originally from Minnesota, I'm from Pennsylvania, and so maybe some of you have had some of that history that you understood some of it, but it was news to me, and it was horrible in some ways, you know, what they went through.
My 6th grade Minnesota history never presented details of this, the whole context of the Indian massacre and all that. I don't know. I'm sure they cleaned it up for.
Well, I'm still amazed nowadays at what we haven't been told or what we don't know about many things that have happened in the past. So I remember my mother talking about growing up. They never moved like this. They were in Minnesota, but they were poor. But she talks about how at the time they didn't know they were poor. They just thought everyone lived like that. And I kind of feel like that's kind of how it was for them too. All the people that they knew were kind of in the same boat.
Yeah, that's true. You know, go ahead.
I don't know about any of the rest of you, but I didn't read any of Laura Ingalls Wilder books when I was a child. I read them all as an adult when my granddaughter had this collection of books. So I had a different perspective of them than I might have if I had read them as a child. And I would encourage anybody who's a little bit interested in this to go back and read those books now as an adult after seeing what went into her building of the memories she used for the books. I think it would give you quite a different take on her literature and knowing how she wrote them.
Yeah, I agree. I want to go back. My oldest daughter a set when she was a child, but a set of the books.
I do have the background of having grandparents who were solder farmers in the Montevideo area that settled there in like 1870. and that's where my mother grew up. And my father was also from that area in the Heron Lake area. So a lot of my family background and history related to much of this. I had more feeling for like Ole Rolvag's books than for Little House on the Prairie. I never watched the TV series, so I don't have that coloring my memories, but I certainly have a lot of feeling for how these people really lived. And when I was on the farm visiting relatives who were on the 100-year family farm, you could see where the sod hut was out in the pasture, and then they actually found like, safety pins and things like that when they were digging there by the one tree. Everybody planted a tree by their front door as much as possible to get some shade and to stabilize the land. That planting trees was a very important part of the world.
Yeah, so I would have to agree with Marilyn, because when I was out in Wilmer, which is just east of Montevideo, there's out in western Minnesota, there's a huge concentration on the Dakota conflict and everything that was going on there. There's museums set up. There are villages that literally were abandoned at the time that you can go tour as well. And then I mentioned Walnut Grove. You can actually see the home that she lived in, and they performed a play there. So they're, especially in western Minnesota, their perspective on Laura Ingalls Wilder is vastly different than ours, even in southeast Minnesota. So let's get moving on to the next question.
I just wanted to just say, Sam, one moment. Marilyn mentioned reading the books now as an adult. They are available on Overdrive. Let's see, can you see my app?
Kind of.
So they are available to get now while you're home.
Thanks, Teresa.
Yeah. So the next question, Fraser writes, Wilder made history. How is this true, and in what ways does the biography bear this out? Discuss how women made history in early eras and how female historical figures depart from the traditional male spheres of politics, government, and the military. How do Wilder's life and reputation differ, for example, from those of famous frontier icons as Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett? How reluctant are we to acknowledge women as heroes, and why? So let's focus on, there's like 3 questions in this one very loaded question. So let's talk about the statement, Wilder made history. How is this true, and in what ways does the biography bear this out? So did you guys feel that her biography, let's see, did it really show how she made history, or do you feel that maybe her books that she wrote made history more than she did herself?
She became a public figure because of the books she wrote, and people learned about them and loved them, and the TV series, of course, gave it a big boost. But I think the biography gives you a more of a historical look into why she was able to do what she did with the knowledge that she had.
She didn't finish school.
Go ahead.
She did. Oh, I was just saying she didn't even finish school. That taught her know how much. Yeah. Go ahead, Gretchen.
I thought that, the author did so much research that really added to the story. She looked at it from a 20th or 21st century eye and explained about Indians and explained about, cutting down all those trees and poverty. I thought it really added to it.
A lot.
It certainly gave you a perspective of how all of this affected today's ecology and what we're still doing to the earth. That it was very up to date in that, giving us the feeling of we didn't just start this today. It's been 100 years in the making of having earth problems.
Right. It also tells you that in some ways humans don't change in some of the ways that they work with each other or react. That railroad was such an important, huge part of what happened and how the West got developed. Everything got developed around them and what mattered and around the people who had the resources and the money. So things don't change all that much, you know?
Except we know more about them nowadays.
We think we do. I don't know. I think we probably have more information, but in some ways, who knows?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about the next question within question 2, which is about Wilder's life and reputation and how it differs from Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett. So we're talking about a female figure versus two male figures. So how do you think they differ, other than the fact that their genders are different?
Well, there's no song written about her.
I had to make left side in my 4th grade class because of her, so I would not have learned how to do that if it weren't for her. Okay, let's move on to the next question in question 2, which was, how reluctant are we to acknowledge women as heroes and why?
Well, women are often behind the men. You know, I think she was stronger obviously in her marriage than her husband. I don't know.
I think it is true, though, that the women are kind of in the background, might be providing all that basic strength and the ability to keep going or do whatever, but not the kind of things that make for excitement or make for a good story or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go to question 3. Discuss the Dakota boom of the late 1870s and 1880s. Why was it a bad idea for homesteaders to farm in the Dakota Territory, since the government knew about the arid nature of the Great Plains? Why did it encourage settlement there? So even though the government knew that the Great Plains wasn't the best place to farm, why did they encourage settlement out there? Nobody?
We need the answer sheet.
Right, I know. Sometimes I wish these came with answers.
It was almost entirely the railroads that really wanted it settled, because that's what made the railroads profitable, was to get people out there and needing supplies and things. You think they talk about the train loads of equipment, farm equipment and so forth, and food and whatever that went out there for the people. If there weren't people there to need it, they wouldn't need the trains to get it there. So settling the area was essential to the railroad's profitability as well.
And of course, the manifest destiny, we keep moving west, you know, the big thing to push to go west, and thinking maybe it would be better future. I don't know if the land, they didn't understand, I don't think, about how it would strip the land and damage, you know, the dust storms and all that. Did they really know all that?
Oh yeah, they probably wouldn't have realized, you know, with the dust storms and different things like that, that it would have been bad in the future. But yeah, so it is interesting that they encouraged, but I think you guys are right with the railroad moving further west. They probably wanted it popularized and whatnot.
Isn't it part of that, you know, grow and conquer and find new places too? I mean, that people just do that, you know, they want to go, they have a better life. So they're willing to take a chance and they don't listen to what the problems might be.
You can tell too by the amount of times they kept moving. You know, they were always trying to get better. So, you know, the amount of times they just moved alone would just pack up everything and just head out to a new area. Just hoping there was always something better.
Yeah, always had a sense of adventure and this, like you say, it's going to get better. And they had this sense of wanting to be independent, I suppose, too. And, but they ravaged the land pretty badly.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that struck me, which I had not thought about before, was how much easier it is to move and go someplace when you're poor, because you don't have a lot of things and you can leave things behind. And I know I used to work in social work, and it always kind of amazed me. People would move out of their apartment and they'd leave many, many things there. And they just didn't have the same sense of owning things or something. So it was kind of interesting, I think, because they moved many times and only took enough, to go in the covered wagon or something. Usually wasn't much.
Okay.
Today they only move with what they can fit in their car, because that's their means of getting to wherever else they're going. They don't hire a van or anything. They just move.
Nowadays, yeah.
Okay, so question 4, discuss Laura and Almanzo's courtship and early marriage. Why did they come together, and how were they compatible or not? How did the tensions that developed between them affect their later lives? Nobody wants to talk about them? I thought this would be a popular topic.
It seemed to point to the fact that when Almanzo had did not disclose the loan he had on the house of $500, that really set Laura off, and then feeling, could she really trust this person? And from then on, she found that he kept doing things that were slightly hidden, or things that she would not have approved, but he went ahead and did them anyhow. And she eventually just decided, well, that's his way and we're going to live with it. Originally,
too, I think she thought he was, well off and did not know about debt that he already, had. And she felt a security with Almanzo that she, hadn't had growing up possibly. But as soon as she found that out, I think it changed the whole atmosphere, because there were other things then that he would be doing that would not, produce funds, or she felt that it was a silly way to do so.
And I think too that they were, I think they were attracted to each other, based on their personalities too. He must have liked the fact that she was a very strong woman, kind of knew what she wanted. It sounded like he was a little more laid back, a little more reticent. He kind of let her.
Also, she didn't know about the debt that he had, and that was early in the marriage, and that might have affected trust. I don't know if you can see or hear me, actually.
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Yeah, usually I have a picture in the corner, but I don't, so, okay. So, yeah, that's fine though.
They had a pretty nice early marriage. They went out riding a lot.
It's romantic.
Yeah.
Well,
and her up, and when they were dating each other.
Again, I'm not too far into it, but I'm getting some glimpses of Rose. And I just read something that talked about how Rose felt apart from her parents, that they were kind of the two, and then she was like not. So I don't know if that plays out later or not.
She does talk about that too. Rose does, that she always was almost like a third wheel in some ways. But I think Rose, she had a lot of psychological problems. And as I was reading through it, just her kind of personality and her symptoms, I thought, oh, she sounds like a manic depressive to me. And then later in the book, she wrote in her diary that she thought she was maybe manic depressive. So I thought, yeah, she had all the symptoms. I mean, she was kind of sexually promiscuous. She would, buy things impulsively, spend a lot of money. She was sort of the opposite of her mom in a way, in that respect. And she would have these, like tantrums, and she would get all mad at people, and she would lie. And, you know, and in her writing, she did that as well. You know, she'd fabricate things. These are all symptoms of that. And I think that was really hard on her mom and dad. And so they had a kind of an odd relationship in a way.
But yet it was so entwined, and her mother, you know, consulted her a lot. And as time goes on in the book, you see that too.
Yeah, well, she did. And there was almost, they were almost kind of enmeshed.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Sense. And yeah, I don't know who was helping who. Sometimes Rose thought she was helping her parents financially because she thought she was such a success. And she kind of took her mother under her wing and helped her become a writer. But really, in the end, it was her mother that was the better writer. So it was complex, you know. So,
yeah. So let's move on. And we're cruising through questions, I think, anyway. We're on question 5. What kind of mother was Laura? How did her experience of caring for Rose compare to what we know of Caroline Ingalls' mothering skills? How did Rose respond to the tragedies of her parents' early married life, Almanzo's illness and disability, their loss of a child, the house lost to a fire, and how would it affect her later life and relationship to her parents? Okay, so
it's often said it's not what happens to you that matters. It's what you let what happens to you do to you. And kind of they're saying that Rose was very much affected by what happened to her family when she was young and on. But there certainly is no so-called excuse for that. But it does help us understand why she developed the way she did. She kind of had her mother's bent for being independent and her father's bent for being impulsive about things she wanted or did. So, you know, it's easy to say she got the worst traits from both of them, but she got the best from them too.
and Rose, you know, she seemed to have a need to kind of exaggerate some of the things even that happened, because even that situation where their house burnt down before they left for Missouri and all that, and she said it was her fault and she blamed herself, and she made it seem like her mother really blamed her, but it doesn't sound like Laura Ingalls actually did, you know, blame her. I mean, she was only 3 years old at the time. But then they say that this might have been one of the reasons she had this propensity to be constantly like buying houses or fixing them up or all this other stuff that she did later in life. Like she was always trying to recreate what she thought she destroyed. But I don't know. She just seemed like she dramatized everything so much. And when Laura was young, I mean, she did have her sisters. There's a little bit of a buffer when you have other siblings, I think. And so she had that kind of life. And Laura helped her family a lot. Maybe she felt more needed, and maybe they tried to protect Rose a little bit more, and maybe she didn't feel as much a part of the family life, because I think they tried to protect her. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't feel like there was a detail to clarify what kind of a mother she was when Rose, unless I'm forgetting part of it, when Rose was younger, to Laura, you know, there's not as deep as about Laura. Oops.
all right. Should we move on to question number 6? In 1894, after failing to make a go of it in the Dakota Territory, the Wilders joined a mass exodus out of the region, journeying to the land of the Big Red Apples in the Missouri Ozarks. How would Laura's exile from her family affect her? And why would she return to De Smet only once in the next couple of decades for her father's death. Why do you think she did not return to see her mother or her sister Mary? Anybody? So why do you think after they left, she never came back except for to see her family upon her father's death?
It was very painful for her to go back, and it was very, very hard for her to say goodbye to them in the first place. And so I'm not sure if that's part of it. And of course, she was involved in other things, and it was a long trip. And there's always that, logistically, but I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah,
I
because
was
she was
actually,
older. But, oh, I'm sorry. She was old. Plays her mother's death. So yeah, that was after, wasn't it? Maybe not.
Is Marge breaking up for everybody?
Yeah, Marge, I am getting you breaking up quite a bit. I don't know if you need to maybe talk closer to your phone or whatnot.
Oh, I did bring it closer. Is this?
There.
Much better.
You're good.
I was off to the side. Sorry.
I'm not sure of the timeline of when it was that like her mother passed away. Does anybody know?
It was quite a bit after her father died. And
But like what, the 40s?
she was in her 80s, wasn't she, the mother?
What years? Like
Oh,
yeah,
1940, 50, what?
I don't remember now, but
I don't either.
You know, and you think about, I'm thinking of that it was the times when travel wasn't that easy, particularly if it got into the 40s when it was like during the Second World War. Was it that late? You didn't go anywhere. You didn't have to go, even for a death in the family, kind of like right now. And there are times that travel, I know when I was a child growing up, we lived in Austin, Minnesota, and Montevideo, and all my mother's family was 200 miles away. Well, that was a once a year, if we were lucky, trip to visit the family when it was my dad's vacation, and otherwise we didn't go anywhere, and that was in the 30s into the 40s.
One thing is she it says in here that had she returned, she would not have found the family as it once was. And that would have been painful.
She didn't feel she had anything really to go back to because things had fallen apart, in other words.
Right.
So I haven't read that far. So the parents, Laura's parents were not successful, or were they having really difficulty at that point? I
think they were getting by, and Mary still lived with them and so forth. And so I don't think it was so bad, but when she went back, her father had left the violin to her, which was very touching to her because she was very close to him. So there was a little bit of that. But otherwise, I don't know that they were doing so terribly, not really worse than they had been.
I see that the mother died in 1924.
okay.
When did the father die? Do you remember?
1924. Oh.
Yeah, in 24, that's the mother.
Yeah. Well, traveling wasn't all that great even then. As Joanne was talking about it there, I had a really touching moment when she mentioned her father leaving her violin. My mother had her father's violin, which I eventually played in high school orchestra. My daughter played in high school orchestra. My granddaughter played in high school orchestra. It now is in the hands of my brother's granddaughter. And I just had a great granddaughter born to my granddaughter who had played it, and I'm hoping that she might be able to play it someday. But it's still in the family. That was made in 1906. It's dated inside by a violin maker in the Montevideo area.
That's wonderful.
Mm.
Wow.
that's cool.
Okay, question 7. Women's clubs, farmers clubs, and book groups were crucial to the development of Wilder's writing career. Does such networking still play a central role for urban or rural women?
You bet.
I was going to say we're all here. So.
Connect to people. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I
Okay.
think everybody's finding out how important all those things are even more right now.
That's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Mhm. Okay. Question 8, discuss Wilder's development as a farm columnist. How did her writing for the Missouri Ruralist shape her ambitions and style?
I didn't get that far, so I don't know.
I don't either.
See, well, she had a very relaxed, informal style, and that I think that did her well when she wrote her books, because she wrote simply so people could understand. And then she actually started developing characters and people like that and experimenting with different scenes and things from her childhood even then. And she'd have little anecdotes about her life in the Dakota Territory and stuff like that. So she drew on that. And then I think then she built on that later. Let's see. And then apparently, I think her family was aware of her writing this or something, because they would save the columns and things. It was, they were very proud of her for that.
And I think she liked the simple things in life too. She loved working the farm and having her hens. When she went to visit her daughter, she just, looked at the place, and Rose wanted her to move there, and she goes, I could never move here. She likes the simple things, the life that she had in the Ozarks. So I think she liked writing about it too.
Let's go ahead and let's talk about question 9 and Rose Wilder Lane and her return to Rockridge Farm and rebuilding the house for her parents, even though they already built the farmhouse. What do you think the Wilders thought of Rock House?
They moved back to the small house when they could.
Yeah,
Eventually.
they did. And I think they kind of tolerated it. It wasn't their house because Laura Ingalls Wilder had put a lot of her own personality into that original house. And, they had that big chimney with the stones from their land and all that. It was very, very personal. And she put a lot of that into it. And I think they just moved to the other place to please the daughter, to sort of humor her a little bit, because she spent a lot of money on it, and she got all these fancy interior decorators and whatnot to come and do this. She had this need or something to constantly be doing this stuff, creating and decorating and all this stuff. So I don't know why she did it. It was again, I think it had to do with her mental health issues.
That's about where I left off in the book. I didn't know Rose came back, so I haven't gotten that far.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Well, there's a lot about that relationship.
What did you say, Marge?
I said there is a lot about that relationship to come, about Rose and Laura, the entanglement or enmeshment.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's move on to question 10. So Laura Ingalls Wilder worked for 10 years for the National Farm Loan Association. So why did she object so vehemently to the New Deal programs designed to help the farmers? Why was federal aid acceptable for her and not for others? If you were a rural farmer in the 1930s, how would you have felt about the federal government? So let's start with the first part of that question. Why did she object so much to the New Deal programs that were put in place to help the farmers?
I don't exactly know, because they did get help. I mean, the Homestead Act was from the government. That's how they got their land, her father's land, in the first place. So they were given some help. And then as this says, the Farm Loan Association, that was helping farmers. But I got the sense that she felt like, well, we did all this on our own. That was, or the impression that she was giving or whatever. And people want to be independent and they don't want handouts and all this other kind of stuff. And so I don't know, maybe she resented it, maybe because they didn't get as much help. I don't know, but I know she was very much against it, and so was her daughter. Her daughter was one of the original libertarians. So I didn't know that about her. She was quite a proponent of that. So I don't know, what do you think, anybody? I don't know why she was, resented that for other people. She couldn't stand Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, and neither could her daughter. So,
But how much was she influenced by her daughter, do you think?
well, that's a good question. Yeah, because I think when her daughter would sort of talk about her ideas about this, and she had done a lot of reading about it, and she even wrote books about it, I think then her mother maybe started out by trying to support her, but there must have been something in what she said that Laura agreed with, but I think maybe she went into it more wholeheartedly because her daughter was pushing that. Because they have, and I didn't know this, they had her daughter and then another woman, and this Anne Rand, who I had heard of before, because she's the one that was the most well-known in this libertarian kind of philosophy. It was these three women that were kind of the mothers of this philosophy, which is interesting. It wasn't men or anything. And this is where, they look back at, especially Anne Rand, who was a friend of Rose Wilder. That was interesting. And well, I won't get into the politics of it, but.
Is that Ayn Rand, A-Y-N, or that wrote?
Yes.
Huh.
The Fountainhead.
Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
And they always say that Rand Paul was such a follower of her philosophy. And some people had said that he was named after her, but I looked that up and it said no, actually his name was Randall and his nickname was Randy, and his wife started calling him Rand. But there was this story going around that he was named after Rand Paul because he and his father were such libertarians, and they say they don't want the government to be involved in anything in your life. And that's really the way Rose Wilder, that's her philosophy as well as Ayn Rand. So.
Too.
All right, so do you feel, or do you see the influence of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression in Wilder's memoir and the Little House books? And if so, how? Discuss the other more personal events that led her writing. So let's talk about the books for those of us who have read the books and or her memoir, and the effects of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. How do you think those influence the books?
Well, I think the Great Depression it really affected her daughter a lot, because her daughter had put quite a bit of her money in the stock market, and she encouraged her mom and dad to put some of their money into the stock market, and consequently it crashed and they lost all this money. So they weren't, and especially Rose did not know how to handle money. So she was in dire straits. And so I think she was sort of pushing her mother a little bit into this because it was a way to make money. And it sort of did pay off, So I think there was some of that. I think she was that propelled her to, you know, so then, and it was getting harder for Laura and Almanzo to do the physical work on the farm, and this writing was easier, you know, what physically easier. And so then that kind of pushed her, I think, a little bit to do that. So, and that's maybe why she and her sister or daughter collaborated so much together. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So piggybacking off of Joanne there with the word collaborate, the next question is about the collaboration between Wilder and Lane. The question is, the way in which Wilder and Lane passed manuscripts back and forth between them has been described as a collaboration. It's even been called ghostwriting. Would you how would you describe it? Do you know of other daughter professional writing relationships? So let's start. How would you describe their passing the manuscripts back and forth? Do you see it more as ghostwriting, or do you see it as a collaboration?
I see it as a collaboration. Certainly in the Little House series books. Later on, I think Rose ended up writing some stuff herself, you know, but it seemed like they went back and forth with each other, and there were things that Laura, you know, specifically wanted in a certain style that she wanted, that she kind of kept her own style, and she didn't tend to make it more sensational than it was, which was Rose's style. So I think she was a little more plain spoken, and I think it worked better for her. But I think Rose did a lot of editing and so forth.
Right. But Laura wasn't afraid to tell her if she really did not want something edited, you know, the way.
Yes, that's true. Exactly.
Yeah.
Or when she did, or she'd say, I don't want this in the book. And I think she was working too with Rose, because, you know, Rose is the one that had all the connections. She had gone all over the world writing, and she had written in all these major magazines and whatnot, and she had books published and so she was supposedly the professional, but really it was, you know, Laura is the one that had that kind of raw talent, I think. So, in mother-daughter, I think of Mary Higgins Clark and Carol Higgins Clark collaborating. I don't know if the mystery writer, she and her daughter collaborated on these Christmas mystery books. I don't know. I'm sure there are others, but
I'm thinking of their Minnesota PJ Tracy. It was a mother and daughter, their mystery books too. Yeah. And I think the mother's died now, and I think the daughter might still be writing, but that was a collaboration, definitely.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah. So let's go on to question 13. It is our last question. How have perceptions of the Little House books changed over the years, or even over the course of your own life? How has Prairie Fires changed your perceptions?
Well, I mostly expanded mine.
Me too. It really added to the stories that I read when I was younger. Gave the history.
For all of the tragedy that happened on Little House on the Prairie, it was always still kind of upbeat. And after reading Prairie Fires, it was like, whoa, there was a lot of going on that I did not realize at all. So that just kind of changed my perception. It wasn't always, you know, just dancing, and there were a lot of trying time.
I think as I've aged, I'm also starting to think that way and realize that what you hear isn't the whole story ever. And that's just what happened here. But when you know more about it, it actually makes it a deeper, richer kind of experience. So so far I like the book, and I think I'm going to finish it. From what you've been talking about, I'm kind of wondering what you've been talking about. So
Yeah, towards the end, me too.
Mhm.
I thought it was a very good book. I learned so much
I did
because
too.
I did not know what a lot of these people had gone through, and I just learned so much from this book. So thank you for selecting that.
Yeah,
Perfect time to be reading it.
yeah,
Oh,
right.
it
Yeah,
is. Oh,
really.
isn't that true? Because it's true when you read this, and some of those other books that we had read, you know, that about with World War I and World War II, and how, you know, the starvation that people went through, and all of this stuff, and never knowing when they were going to get bombed or whatever. And I feel like, you know, it's tough now, but at least, you know, we're in comfortable homes and we have food and all of that, you know, and we have this, we can connect this way where they, you know, sometimes those newspapers would be confiscated, or people would be stealing their farms and the food and whatnot. And so those books also help.
And you wouldn't be seeing people, you know, back then. You didn't have the technology like we have, you know,
Yeah.
alone. Whereas we can still hook up with friends and family.
Yeah, that's, I mean,
Here,
it's important.
Right.
But yeah, thanks for coming,
Okay.
guys.
Thank
Well,
you.
thanks a
Take
lot.
care, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay
Bye-bye.
safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.